Chapter 12. The little man, scarcely 5 feet tall, bowed low, then extended his hand, American style. "I am Hiroshi Hanahara, at your service, ma'am." Brenda noticed his precise movement, his military bearing. "Your English is perfect, Hiroshi," the girl replied, smiling. "Where did you learn it?" "I am a second-generation Japanese, ma'am. What you call a Nisei. Born and raised at Fort Ord, California. Been in Uncle Sam's army so long, I have attained the rank of captain by default," Hiroshi said, grinning. "Don't let him fool you," James interjected, clasping his friend on the back. "Hiroshi may only be a captain, but he happens to be the senior karate instructor for the Far East Armed Forces." Brenda threw her arms around the diminutive officer, his face almost level with her chest. "Perhaps both of you would like to relax in a less crowded establishment," Hiroshi suggested, leading the way across the littered floor to his car outside. Across town, Hiroshi led the young couple into a low-ceilinged restaurant, the walls carpeted with oriental tapestries, gilded dragons, black onyx vases. "Please stop here and leave your shoes," he said, turning to Brenda in the cramped lobby. "Let me help you with them," he said, bending before her and gently unbuckling each shoe. Brenda was vaguely embarrassed, but let Hiroshi complete the ceremony. "Come," he said, opening one of the paper-paneled openings. "I'll show you how to eat the civilized way, with chopsticks." The trio enjoyed a sumptuous meal, Brenda enthralled by Hiroshi's many tales of the Pacific, and he was equally impressed by the beautiful woman at James' side. Not the usual Western woman, with their rowdy manners and prideful ways. He nodded at her every comment, approving the wisdom of her words. "You are special," the Japanese told Brenda. "You are Corporal Thomas, one true love, a pearl in the Orient. Like me, you are out of your rightful place, and yet you feel at home, don't you?" "I love Okinawa very much," Brenda replied. "Very well. From now on, I shall be your guardian, next to James, of course. I will watch over you with my life." "You mean like a bodyguard?" the girl asked, incredulous. "Just so," Hiroshi said, bowing a most excellent bow. Brenda lay still in the twilight, listening to the ticking of her wristwatch. She could see its fluorescent glow in the approaching darkness. She lay upon the coarse woolen blanket, watching the sea crash beyond the recessed entrance to the cave. She smiled, remembering the wonderful time they had today. Fried chicken and mashed potatoes for lunch. A long walk along the white coral beach. The grueling therapy with Dr. Gray was over now, and Brenda felt the warm glow of satisfaction fill her body. She lay naked upon the blanket, and the cool breezes fanned her hair across her breasts, her nipples hard and erect. James had gone to the front of the cave to check something. Brenda crushed the blanket to her face, pretending it was him. She could still smell English leather mixed with the wool. She felt no shame, she felt no remorse for the first time. She could hear James' footsteps echoing louder in the cave. Life was good. "It was nothing but a noise," James said, kneeling down beside her in the darkness. Brenda rolled over on her side, lifting herself up on one elbow, playfully running her slender fingers through James' sandy hair. "Was it a wonderful day for you?" he asked, his crystal blue eyes sparkling. "Oh, yes," Brenda replied, laying her head against his chest, feeling the hammer strokes of her beloved's heartbeat. "I wish it would last forever and ever." "It will be forever, my love. My enlistment is up in 3 months. I'll go back home to Fort Collins. Your father is due back not too long after me. There's no reason we can't be married the day you turn 18. James gazed at her frankly, and Brenda was not ashamed. "Will it be forever, Jamie?" Brenda looked past him to the sea beyond. The smile on her face faded for an instant. "Jamie, do you believe in it forever? I mean, a hereafter?" As often happens with close friends, Brenda had made a jump completely off the subject, yet her companion was not amazed nor disturbed. James dropped abruptly into his native Western drawl. "I reckon, but don't ask me why." What do you mean? Brenda Jean sat up, crossing her legs and folding her hands in one graceful motion. Well, Brenda Jean, I'm not a religious person. You of all people know that. I'm not too good with philosophy, so don't laugh. I bet going to heaven's just like leaving one job for another. You work at a place for months, then years. Seems like you'll never get out. That's life. Scenery the same, season after season. But you know darn well you'll see new scenery someday. You aren't likely to work at the same job forever. After all, jobs always changed before. You felt that each job would never end, and then, sure enough, one day you up and quit it. That's death. See what I mean? Brenda shook her head. James tried again. Your better judgment says you will quit that job, but you don't believe it right now. You can't see it. So you wait, knowing in your heart, disbelieving with your eyes. That's about the best I can put it for the hereafter. Brenda Jean lay on her side and smiled. You mean we live and get tired, and just when we've had enough and are fed up, the hereafter comes? James nodded. More. The hereafter is that new job you've been drooling about. Even better. Life goes on, Brenda Jean. It just seems like a dead end from where we are, that's all. She returned his gaze and lowered herself into his arms, feeling his erection against her thigh. I do love you so much, James, she murmured. You are my doubting Thomas, aren't you? You weren't sure I could stop drinking, but I did. You weren't sure I could ever make love to you either, but... Her last words were incoherent as she touched her lips to his. The purple Okinawan sky was pierced with a last streak of orange before the dying sun glinted a last time upon the deserted cave. Moments later, darkness fell, protecting the two young lovers from the eyes of a wicked world, sealing them inside their own world of innocence forever. One day, James took Brenda down the island to the overhanging cliffs of Mabuni. All right, James said, spreading one arm out over the embankment to the roiling surf below. Tell me, history nut, what happened here? Brenda smiled. James wished she would grin, spontaneous, just once. This is where, in the last stages of the Okinawan invasion during World War II, hundreds of Japanese soldiers threw themselves to their death rather than surrender. Mabuni has been known ever since as Suicide Cliff. James brought his hands together in mock applause. Very good, ma'am. You get an A. Brenda's lips parted slightly. She was very happy. What else do I get? As the day progressed, the couple walked along the cliff as it meandered in a narrow ribbon in places almost to the grassy edge, overlooking the roaring water far below. James led the way back up the cliffs to a safer place before speaking. I'll have to be away next weekend. I'm sorry, Bryn. Why, James? We've got war games coming up. Brenda picked up a chip of coral from the face of an outcropping and threw it across the green waters of the South China Sea. You can't be with me next weekend, she said, with an increasing panic in her voice. The boy shoved his hands deeper in his pockets. Well, Brenda, I don't want to be away from you, but it's one of those things. You said there is some kind of army camp reunion and you just have to go. Brenda looked at him petulantly. Brenda, you know better than that. Your dad will be there too, James replied irritably. Why can't I go? Because only Army personnel are allowed. I bet your friend Carol will be there, right? Brenda said. Probably. After all, she is a Spec 4 in my company. James looked to the skies as if to receive divine help. Brenda, you don't think... I don't know what to think, the girl shouted. She sniffed, suppressing a lump in her throat. All I know is you and I will be apart for such a stupid reason. Maybe if I get Carol to give you a key to her apartment, you can come. Oh, so it's still Carol, is it? Brenda exploded. And why would I want to be around the same girl you... Brenda choked on the sentence. Maybe you two still have unfinished business together. Maybe with me out of the way... Brenda, that's not true. James' irritation showed in his voice. He reached for her. Let go of my arm. You're hurting me, Brenda said, jerking away. Careful of that ring, James said. As Brenda's arm jerked backwards, the ring cut an angry red gash on her finger as it banged into the coral rock beside them. The exquisite ring he had given her, a gold band with a white and black pearl side by side, was almost crushed. You're so damn concerned about this ring. Here, go get it. Brenda pulled the ring from her finger, flinging it from the cliff where they stood. James stared in disbelief. Now that was real smart, he said, craning his neck over the edge of the precipice. James let himself down gingerly amid the needle-sharp outcroppings of stone that rose from the shallow waters. He found the ring and scaled the cliff, winded from the steep ascent. Here, he said, sticking the ring out in front of her. Brenda made no attempt to take it. James squinted nervously, trying to read her face. Her features were hidden, but he could see tears. He reached for her gently this time. Come here, babe. Brenda turned to James, and her face was a mask of stone. The look of utter hatred was so complete that he hardly felt the sting as she slapped him full in the face. Don't ever call me that! James' face grew dark with anger. It took a conscious effort to restrain himself. I'm better than that, he thought fiercely. All right, Brenda. I think I can see how much I mean to you. Don't worry. I won't mention anything about my past. Or my future. He turned and walked quickly down the overgrown path toward town. Brenda looked out to sea for a long time. My daddy, she said under her breath. Now he's sounding just like my daddy. My God, are they all the same? Just like... Oh, well, it was no use. Nothing made sense anymore. My daddy, just like my daddy. While on maneuvers, James had long thoughts about the relationship with Brenda. Maybe she needs someone else, he said to himself. After all, Dr. Gray says she is much improved. James smiled, as much at the thought of her physical perfection as her emotional state. I'm her first lover, but Lord knows I shouldn't be her last. Maybe I've been overprotective. Maybe I've tried too hard to change something that can't be changed, he thought. Maybe I've not tried hard enough. Maybe I should try to be more patient. Maybe I should find another psychiatrist. Maybe I'm just too tired to keep worrying about it. All James knew for sure was that he had tried everything he knew and nothing seemed to work. What was it Dr. Gray had said? Being an adult meant accepting the fact that sometimes there was no good solution to a problem, and even the best solution might be a lousy one. He transferred to Vietnam within the month. With James gone, Brenda's daily routines changed. Her life more than ever alternated between Margot's housework and school. Brenda tried to enjoy both of them as much as she could. Dorothy, the apple of Margot's eye, was always picking and prodding at her appearance. She was constantly changing the color of her hair, trying to turn mouse brown into shining Norwegian blonde through the mysteries of bleach. Brenda edged her way into the bathroom, retrieving dirty clothes for the wash. Ow! Brenda yelled, jumping involuntarily. She reached down to retrieve a green, spiny hair roller off the floor. Oh, Bren, there you are. What color do you think it's going to be? Dorothy said, turning her back to the mirror, pointing to a mass of lifeless and drenched curls. Brown, Brenda replied, holding a pile of towels in her arms. Well, you could be a little more complimentary, Bren. Besides, I heard that Steve Conway likes blondes, and I intend to be one. Wonderful, Dorothy. Well, just because nobody goes out with you is no reason to get smart, Bren. It's all right. I have plenty to keep me busy, Brenda said. Of course you do, Dorothy clucked sympathetically. Spending your whole school day in that musty counselor's office. A person would think you liked it better in school than you do at home. I guess that means you just love it here, Brenda replied, closing the cabinet door. Why, Brenda Jean Campbell, what a question. Where would you and I be without Daddy and Mama? Dorothy reached for another curler. Brenda stared thoughtfully at her stepsister, then spoke carefully. Dorothy, have you noticed anything unusual about Daddy? Oh, yes, Daddy's getting pudgy around the middle. Isn't that cute? Dorothy cooed. Last week, Alan said something about it. I thought Daddy was going to clobber him. Brenda tried again. No, I mean, does he ever make comments to you? Comments on my latest boyfriend? But then what do you expect from parents? Anyway, what color eyeshadow do you think I should wear? Brenda dropped her gaze. Apparently Lewis never bothered Dorothy. Blue always looks good on you, Dorothy. Oh, Brenda, it does not. I look horrible in blue. Last year, Janie Harville said I looked great in brown. I should have known better than to ask you. Dorothy made a face and gave total attention to her image in the mirror. Brenda went back to her chores in the kitchen. The house was quiet tonight. Margot and Lewis had had only 3 beers apiece and were dozing in front of the television. Brenda thought of the latest letter from James. He wrote often, almost 1 letter a day. She kept them all, carefully wrapped in a box, under the bed. Tonight, after she had started the laundry, there would be a few precious moments left for James. She loved the sight of his handwriting. She loved... "Hi, babe," a voice came from behind. Brenda's blood froze. She felt Lewis approach her. "Just came in to get a snack," Lewis winked, padding around the kitchen like a huge cat, his stocking feet sliding along the floor. Brenda watched him out of the corner of her eye as he rummaged through the leftovers on the stove, poking one large finger into the mashed potatoes. "I'll wrap those up in a minute," the girl said timidly. "Okay," Lewis replied, sucking his fingers noisily. "How you doing, babe?" "Aw, you're all tensed up," he continued, massaging her neck with one hand. "Let me help you." Brenda felt a huge left hand slide around her waist, then creep upward. She gripped the dish in her hand tightly. She could feel sweat under her arms already. "I will not scream, I will not," she thought furiously. "Dad, I can finish these dishes in no time." "Well, all right. You finish up in here." Brenda closed her eyes in relief. Just then she felt his fingers dig deep into the cup of her brassiere. "See you later," he added, padding back into the darkness of the living room, munching an apple. "Jamie, help me," Brenda prayed silently. The television blared the 10 o'clock news as Brenda wiped down the counters in the kitchen. Dorothy emerged from the bathroom. "Well, what do you think?" Dorothy announced grandly. Margot looked over from her chair, her mouth open in amazement. Lewis turned around. Lawrence and Junior had just come in after working on the car. All eyes were on Dorothy, but the room was ghastly silent. Little Alan started to snicker, then the 2 older boys burst out into laughter. Dorothy sensed something was wrong. When Brenda heard Margot and Lewis roaring with laughter, she dropped her dish towel and walked to the doorway. "What's the matter?" Dorothy exclaimed, seeing Brenda's choked laughter. "Look at a piece of your hair," Brenda said quietly, covering her own smirk with a hand. Dorothy pulled down a solitary curl, and her mouth went slack with disbelief. "Ah!" she screamed, running for the bathroom. "Why didn't you tell me it was green?" Next day at school, Brenda opened the door to the B hall with a groan, almost knocking over the little blue sign that read Junior Counselor Office. Her eyes itched madly. Her legs felt heavy, like all the blood had settled there. She felt lightheaded, almost giddy with exhaustion. She knew it was the housework. Margot had awakened Brenda at 1 in the morning, telling her that the dishes needed to be done over. Brenda had wearily trudged downstairs, rewashed and dried the dishes, finishing by 2:30. "Brenda, are you all right?" The girl turned as if in slow motion. It was Mr. Hodges, the head of the department. "Yes, sir, I'm fine. I got to bed late, that's all." Hodges spoke loudly. "Too much television, eh?" He wagged a finger for the benefit of another counselor walking by. Then he spoke in a lower voice. "Housework again, Brenda Jean?" "Yes, Mr. Hodges," the girl answered, her eyes meeting his. The counselor gazed vacantly in the direction of the shuffling scholars beyond the windows. "I need someone to help file reports on next year's incoming students. It's not a big job, but everyone leaves the office by 3 and the reports just pile up. There is also a couch in case you wanted to, rest your eyes for a bit. Could you stay till 4 each day?" "Sure," Brenda replied, catching the hint that she could sleep in the office unseen and undisturbed and away from Margot. "Great. See you then." "Mr. Hodges?" "Yes, Brenda." "Thanks." It was the first time she had smiled that morning. On weekends, Brenda spent many afternoons walking along the beach. She preferred to be alone, but sometimes Lewis took the family on outings. Elizabeth and Alan played in the nearby sand, while Lewis and Junior had waded out into the surf with big 3-inch poles, reef fishing. Lewis was in a good mood. He'd even rented an extra pole for Brenda. Brenda had shuffled her feet as she moved through the shifting sand, notifying any jellyfish that she was coming. Lewis and Junior walked quickly into the clear water, then wormed their toes into the murky bottom and waded their poles up. "Splash some more," Brenda called out to them, pointing to her feet. Lewis waved her off. "Don't worry, babe, this water is clear as a bell. I can see almost anything." The black fin of the marlin broke the water far out in the distance. Lewis and Junior stepped forward into the deeper water, enticed by the fish. In an instant, Lewis' line went taut. It was stiff and as thick as a cable in the water's distorted reflection. "Christ, I've got one!" he yelled, stepping further into the water up to his thighs now. "Daddy got one! Daddy got one!" the smaller children chanted, holding their buckets and jumping up and down on the sand. Brenda moved her lips in silent horror, but nothing emerged. Only Brenda saw the silent flap of an underwater wing. The wingspread of the manta ray looked to be 25 feet across. The ray was moving slowly now, just gaining speed, but in another instant it would push itself off the reef and plunge to the bottom with Lewis' line still embedded in it. Even now, Lewis was being pulled steadily into the bay. In another moment or two, he would disappear completely. Brenda dropped her pole and reached for her ankle in one swift movement. Hiroshi had taught her to keep a utility knife there. Lewis' grin was still stupidly plastered on his face when Brenda got to him and cut the line. "Why did I cut the line?" she asked herself. "Why?" Did Lewis magically stop coming to Brenda's room after she saved him? He did not. And now, even James was gone. Even though he had shipped out to Vietnam, letters came from him regularly, and she found it easier to say things in print she could not say in person. The relationship continued, but somehow Brenda felt it was not the same. Without seeing James, he faded into the standard mold of all men, and it was easy to find fault, even in casual comments. He had casually mentioned in a letter about breaking into Dr. Gray's office, listening to her taped medical record. Her records! Even James had lied to her, used her, like all men. At the beach where they used to spend Saturday afternoons, Brenda meditated on this. Sometimes she fell asleep, dreaming of what might have been. Not until the sun glinted in long, slanted shafts against the darkening water did she realize the time. "James," she said, expecting to find him beside her. But he was gone. "Jamie," she moaned, and the pathetic sound faded into the flat horizon. Brenda sat on her bed, rereading the ragged slips of paper in her hand. Tattered and smeared, some lines ruined by the censor's stamp, Brenda treated them like precious manuscripts. They were James' letters from Vietnam. Dear Brenda Jean, sorry I haven't sent your ring back through the mail. I want to keep it until we meet again. It's been 6 months now since I left you. I guess I was pretty upset. Please forgive me if you can. It was a mean thing to transfer like I did. I guess it was done in the heat of the moment, but now I'm stuck for the duration. Don't worry about me too much. Remember, I'm not exactly frontline infantry. Truck drivers stay back in the reserve area mostly. I guess you could say we collect $20 a day for changing the oil. I drive down some pretty spooky trails, delivering supplies, but nothing much ever happens. Last week, Sean had to duck inside the cab because snipers were taking pot shots at our tires. It was a game for them, though. They weren't serious about shooting us. They were waiting for the platoon to come up. Well, I guess I better sign off for now. Remember, I love you, Brenda Jean. Many things have threatened to separate us, but we have always survived, haven't we? Nothing like a little war can separate our love for each other. Remember me in your bed tonight, because God, I remember you. Merry Christmas, and remember, this will be the first and last Christmas you spend without me. A shadow fell across the blue lines of script as Brenda finished reading. Put that shit up, Lewis said, stepping into the room. I'm sorry, Daddy, what is... Lay down, Lewis commanded. He shoved the girl onto the bed, holding a blouse as she fell, ripping buttons from it. My blouse, the girl whimpered. Never mind, Lewis said, reaching for the latch hook of his belt. You won't need that shirt anyway. Daddy? Shut up and take off that skirt before it gets torn, too. I'm not made out of money, you know. Brenda reached for her skirt with quivering hands, time beginning to wheel before her eyes. She did not know whether seconds or minutes had passed when the nude man came at her. James, please help me, was all she had time to think before her legs were pushed apart. Pass me that ashtray, Lewis said, a cigarette dangling between his lips as he adjusted his undershirt. Brenda lay in bed, covered up to the chin, as if the very chill of winter was upon her. I don't know how I'm going to sell this fucking house, Lewis said. We should have lived on post. I don't know why I let your mother talk me into this. His voice was warm, like a crackling winter fire. Brenda fought the urge to move closer to it. She had never been able to reconcile that gentle voice with the monster who commanded it. Selling the house, Daddy? What do you mean? I told you, damn it, we're moving back to the States. I've been transferred to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I'll have to cut back on your allowance for a while until we get settled again. I know your mother's tight with her money. Shit, she's always buying stuff for Dorothy, and it's only fair that I get some things for you. Lewis stood up, anxious to get downstairs. His intuition was good. Almost at that instant, Margot's voice was heard in the living room. Lewis, where are you? Come look at this. Her footsteps could be heard coming up the stairs. Coming, dear, Lewis said, hurrying across the room and opening the door a few inches so it would sound like he was in the hallway. He turned briefly. Get some clothes on. Brenda did not hear his last command. All her thoughts revolved around what he said before. Sell the house? No, God, no. James, they're making me leave you. They're making me leave you. Please, oh, please come back to me. Lewis was scheduled to leave in 2 weeks, and James had extended his enlistment by another year when he transferred to Vietnam. James wouldn't be back in the States before Brenda's senior year. She thumbed the pages of her calendar uselessly, fighting back tears. Sunday, a day of rest. I hope you are well. Brenda shook her head, rocking the little desk violently as her eraser smeared out the beginning lines of her letter. She began again. James, you know I still love you. Nothing will ever change that. I know you'll be back soon, but I still miss you so. Is your enlistment up June 1st or 21st? I forgot. Even though it's April, June seems so far away right now. It might as well be forever. Dad and Margot gave me a nice present for my birthday. It was a matching house robe with slippers. Actually, I think Dad got it for me. Oh, why can't I just hate him? Just when I think that you and Doc Gray have me all straightened out, the bastard goes and does something nice for me. Hopkinsville is okay. It's not as terribly hot here as it was in Naha, but nothing is as fun as it was with you. Somehow I feel things are changing. Margot is even bitchier than she was on Okinawa. Alan and Elizabeth don't even come to me like they used to. Daddy's still... well, you know. James, you won't change, will you? I don't go to church because Margot goes there. I want to believe in God, though, like when I was little with my grandparents. Used to sing in the choir, you know. I want to believe that you and me were meant to be. Sounds like a song, ha. Well, I guess I'll say goodbye for now. Don't forget me. Love, Brenda Jean. Brenda carefully folded the letter and inserted it into an envelope. She could sneak down to Dad's desk tomorrow morning to get a stamp. Tomorrow morning. She looked at the bedside clock, squinting. Brenda had left her new glasses in the bathroom. It was 4:30 now. It just isn't fair, she said quietly, closing her eyes and pinching the bridge of her nose. Her fingertips came away wet. She rose and looked outside. Stepping lightly, Brenda tiptoed downstairs, going out onto the screened porch, watching the brilliant tropical flowers in the early dawn. She counted 4, 5, 6 of them, all growing in unison, as if planted there by some omniscient gardener. Not like me, she thought. Even the flowers have company, but I'm alone. Sometimes even James' letters sounded hollow and empty. He wrote often, telling of his experiences driving the trucks containing supplies, ammunition, men. He would tell a story of people he met or things he had seen, but Brenda felt he did not tell everything. Brenda tried not to let James' reticence spoil her love for him. Still, life was so lonesome. Ellie, her first girlfriend on Okinawa, had moved back to Nebraska. She had stopped writing shortly thereafter. Probably married by now. Marriage, the secret weapon Brenda and James almost unveiled to her parents a year ago. It was a sunny day, before the silly argument, before James went away. They had driven out to Kiamu Point, to their secret cave in the hillside. The two lay nestled in each other's arms, each secretly counting the hours before they would have to go back to Naha. "James, why don't we elope?" Brenda said, escaping his grasp, jumping up from the blanket and padding over to the picnic basket. He watched as she crossed the darkened space, the shadow of her breast dimly visible in the half-light. James reached for his pants, fumbling for cigarettes and a lighter. "James?" Brenda asked again, sensing a thoughtful silence. "We could elope, couldn't we?" she asked, sitting next to James as she munched a sandwich. James sat upright, exhaling a long blue stream from his nostrils. "No, we can't elope, Brenda Jean." "Do you mean we can't or you won't?" James turned to her, taking both of her hands in his. "Oh, darling, don't you think I've considered it 100 times? What better way to get you away from that bastard, I used to think." "Used to think." Brenda saw a glistening in his eyes as he continued. "If we were back in the States, or he was a civilian, I would say yes in a minute. But here, in a foreign country, things are different. You are a minor. You must have your father's signature on any marriage license before it would be legal. You know he would never give it." Brenda nodded, her own eyes glistening now. "Both you and I, as part of the Army, are subject to military law. If we ran away, the law would send you back to your father in a heartbeat. Anything we do would be illegal, don't you see?" "Yes, I suppose," she said. She pitched the apple outside. It had lost its flavor somehow. Later that day, the couple walked along the coral beach, each wrapped in their own dismal thoughts. "James!" Brenda shouted abruptly. "I've got it!" "Got what?" he said. "I know how we can get married, and Daddy can't do a thing to stop it." "What do you mean?" "It's so simple," Brenda sang, skipping in front of James like a 7-year-old, eagerness shining in her eyes. "What would happen if I got pregnant?" I don't know," James replied, scratching his head for a rebuttal. "I really don't know. We would have to get married," Brenda shouted at him. "There must be a catch," James said, walking faster now, turning the idea over in his mind. "Well, what is it?" Brenda teased. "I'll let you know when I think of it," James shouted, breaking into a dead run and chasing Brenda back to their cave. She raced ahead of him, flinging off her clothing as she ran. "What about rubbers?" she shouted into the wind. "What rubbers?" James shouted, as they both ducked into the dark and inviting opening ahead. How silly and eager we were then, Brenda said to herself, as she remembered those days. The red flowers swayed merrily in the sunlight as the girl rocked back and forth in her chair on the porch. Yes, it had seemed like the perfect solution. James had come to her every week, Saturday and Sunday, hoping to induce the pregnancy that would end their problems. They couldn't stay in the house, of course, so James would pick her up and drive to a deserted part of the island. One night, though, he parked the car and reached for a cigarette, making no moves toward her. Brenda, already unbuttoning her blouse, smiled playfully. "No, silly, that's for after, not now." James sighed. "James, what's wrong?" "We have to stop." A sick feeling came over Brenda, but her curiosity urged her on. "You don't want to make love to me anymore?" "That's not it at all," James replied, turning to her. Something occurred to me last night after I left you, and I can't get it off my mind. Brenda stared dumbly, waiting for him to finish. I was thinking, our goal was to get you pregnant, right? Yes. We were hoping to get your body excited at the thought of intercourse, right? Brenda shook her head, uncertain of his conclusion. Last night, as I was driving home, it dawned on me how stupid I'd been. That bastard still lives in your house. What guarantee... He stared pleadingly at the girl, unwilling to finish the thought. Stop it, Brenda interjected. I get the picture. She clenched her eyes and drew the limp blouse around her. We can encourage your body to get pregnant, but we can't know who the father is, Brenda. We'll just have to wait until you are legal age to get you out of his house. And so, the last chance for James to marry her had been discarded. Now he was gone. Brenda watched the grapes on the arbor overhanging the veranda, the sun beginning to glint off them, the wind brushing the leaves in the rush of morning. She saw the purplish bark of the shadowy trees, bending their bushy heads in the heated dawn. The hum of her portable radio brought Brenda back to consciousness, and she listened sadly to the song that played. Soldier boy, oh my little soldier boy, I'll be true to you. Take my love with you to any port or foreign shore. Darling, you must feel for sure I'll be true to you. Soldier boy, oh my little soldier boy, I'll be true to you. Brenda washed the last of the lunch dishes eagerly, looking out the kitchen window for the mailman. As she saw him reach the Campbell mailbox, she literally trembled with excitement. Life in the stifling, dusty heat of Tennessee had been boring compared with Okinawa. James' letters were the only thing that punctuated the unending round of housework that summer. Today was August 11th. Brenda counted each day because James had finally been discharged. He was making his way to her. Each successive postmark showed a more easterly address. Brenda hardly noticed her father in the night now. He came as a vast unknown shadow, and she stared vacantly up to the ceiling until he had gone. She would think of James and his promise to return. Her thirst for news from James seemed to accelerate, yet she was troubled by odd dreams at night, in which she could see James driving to her on a dark, lonely highway. Only the lights of his truck illuminated the rocky, jutting crags that lined the dim outline of the road. The truck rounded a bend out of sight. The dream shifted to the dark slopes below the road, where a deer raised its head for a moment as if listening. Brenda awoke with a start. The rest of the dream shattered in the din of the morning alarm clock. A deer? She murmured to herself each morning. What's a deer doing in James' dream? It was only a matter of time before James arrived in Hopkinsville or sent money for her to meet him. Brenda raced outside each day to meet the mailman, feeling the blast of summer against her face. Her heart beat faster with every step. "Hi, Mr. McMillan," she called out. "Hello, Brenda," the postman replied, smiling. "I bet I know what you're looking for." He waved an airmail envelope in his hand. "Yep, got another one from that beau of yours, see?" "Thank you," the girl replied, grasping eagerly at the letter. She inserted a long fingernail into the flap, opening it carefully. "I always keep the envelopes," she said sheepishly. Mr. McMillan knew Lewis Campbell. "Tisk, tisk," McMillan would tell his wife in the evenings. "That young girl seems like a prisoner in that house. Always running outside holding a dish rag or a dust rag or some such thing. I wonder what her mother does all day. Her daddy's a great bear of a man, military, you know. Always standing out in the yard, cussing one of the neighbors. Lucky she's got that young man somewhere out west. He's always promising to come and get her. She reads me the letters sometimes. I hope he comes soon, but you know these modern boys. Like as not, he'll leave her high and dry in this town. It's a sight to see her running to meet me every day, though. She just lives for it." McMillan's wife smiled absently. She suspected these modern teenagers needed better things to do than bird dog the mailbox. "Well, what's the news, Miss Campbell?" the mailman said, putting his sack down gratefully. Brenda tore at the envelope, then smoothed out each folded sheet in search of the familiar script. She inhaled suddenly. Her green eyes widened, the color becoming luminous. "Oh, Mr. McMillan, he's coming, he's coming!" She moved closer, running a finger along the text of the letter. "See? He's in Fort Collins now, working for his father's trucking firm. There's a load to be delivered to Denver and Frankfurt and... Ecstatic, Brenda shoved the pages toward the postman eagerly. "Let me see," the old man said, adjusting his glasses. "It says here he's coming along I-70 to St. Louis, then down to Hopkinsville. Here, what's this last part mean?" "You mean the part about bring your birth certificate?" Brenda said with a grin. "He means I'll have to prove my age. We're getting married, Mr. McMillan, whether my family lets me or not." Brenda walked on a cloud the rest of the day. Even Margot's complaints about the housework could not dampen the girl's enthusiasm. Brenda was making the beds when Louis appeared in the doorway. "How you doing, honey?" he said, coming up from behind. Brenda felt a dry heave as he ran a hand carelessly across her stomach. "Excuse me, Daddy. I've got to start in the bathroom," she almost shouted as she squirmed out of his grasp and, running across the hall, slammed the door behind her. She got as far as the sink, leaning over the cool porcelain with her eyes closed, forcing back the nausea that was like a living thing in her belly. Amid the distorted echoes of the bathroom, Brenda listened for her daddy's footsteps. She turned on the faucet, hoping the sound of running water would mask her heaving. "Oh, God, don't let him come in here," the girl prayed, remembering too late she had not turned the lock. Louis stood outside for a moment, then paced back down the hall. Brenda scarcely breathed, listening. Satisfied he was gone, she lowered her head into the sink and vomited.